So, Hendrik, let's get started. I'm going to give a quick introduction on CareStack. You have about 45 seconds about CareStack, the same for Darby, and then we're going to get going to the program. So if you want to advance a slide. I think a lot of you out there may be familiar with us by now. If not, Jim Gerson, VP of Sales and Marketing, one of the principals at CareStack. CareStack is a 100% cloud-based solution for the complete management of the multi-location dental practice. And we find ourselves working with two types of offices. The first is growing, having success. They're ambitious. They see technology as giving them a competitive advantage, and they're just not sure how to get there. They need a little bit of help. The second type of group is, unfortunately, they're frustrated and aggravated. Either they can't centralize key functions like patient engagement. They're not able to report on multiple locations and give stakeholders real visibility to KPIs. And all these different bolt-ons that they have to add on to the software just keep adding and adding up. And the principals are losing sleep with all the different invoices that are coming in for these multiple software subscriptions that it takes to run a DSO. So if you find yourself falling into one of those two categories, all I ask you to do is go to carestack.com, look at us, take a look, maybe schedule a demo to learn more about CareStack. Andrea, I'm going to turn it over to you. Are you able with your audio? Is your phone working now?
I'm hoping so.
Go for it, please.
Hi everyone, we are delighted and honored to be partnering with CareStack and with Hendrik Live from Sage Dental Consulting. Here at Darby, we have launched some new programs and initiatives, especially for DSOs, and especially in this environment to help DSOs be more successful despite the new and ever-changing challenges. And that also is part of why we're partnered with CareStack. We believe we've got between us solutions and offerings that really make a difference to both patient care and sustainability and growth. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Andrea.
And Hendrik, I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll here, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Just I think I need to reshare it. But why don't you take away the floor, okay? And we'll keep an eye on the Q&A for questions.
Yeah, so I would love to have our panel of experts introduce themselves. So, this is a very, very experienced panel of experts with combined century of experience. So, Linda, I would love you to introduce yourself to our amazing audience.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I'm Linda Ryan, and I have been in the dental industry for 40 plus years, certainly dating myself, but excited to be here. I started as a dental assistant and through the years was lucky enough to work with amazing doctors and mentors and went on to start smaller DSOs. I've been in the DSO space most of my career in multiple large DSOs. And I've done regional management, purchasing, marketing, everything you can think of except for maybe being the dentist. So my passion is definitely talent acquisition and recruiting. And I've found through the last probably 6 years, just a lot of best practices and some sort of non-traditional ways of attracting talent and really helping organizations find the right candidates for their offices so they can be more successful and generate more patient care. And I'm excited to share some of those tips with you today.
Oh, that's perfect, Linda. Thank you very much for that introduction. Kerry, would you like to introduce yourself to our amazing audience?
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Kerry Lasher. I'm the VP of Performance with Independence Dental Services. The title of VP of Performance wears many hats, and one of those is the recruiting hat. I've been in the dental industry 25 years, not quite as much as Linda there, but trying to catch up the best I can. I've had every side of dentistry from the clinical to the management side to regional management and DSOs, now helping lead one of the fastest growing DSOs in the country. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us, Kerry. Ron, would you like to introduce yourself to our amazing audience?
Sure. My name's Ron Brush. I am known as the most appropriate last name in the business. And I've been in HR, primarily recruiting, for 24 years. The last 14 of them have been all in the dental industry. I worked for 2 large DSOs. I've been to over 40 dental schools in the country and given lunch and learns, dinners, 50 residency programs, and I've hired a little over 1,000 doctors in 44 states. I also spent about 2 years as the director of operations. And about 5 years ago, I started my own business as a talent acquisition consultant in the dental industry.
Well, that's quite a storied history there, Ron. Thank you for sharing with us. And my name is Hendrik Lai. I started my career off as a clinician and built up multiple practices with a practice limited to oral surgery. So I have sat in every chair in the dental office except for the hygienist chair, as well as almost every chair in the corporate boardroom. So I have a real strong understanding of growing a business from the clinical side as well as the business side. I'm currently the co-founder and principal consultant at Sage Dental Consulting, and I am in Wisconsin, but weirdly not a crazy cheesehead yet. So thank you to all of our panelists for joining. So we will begin to kick off and end our poll to begin with. So thank you for everyone who participated in our poll. So as we move into the panel proper, it's good for us to get an understanding of what the background against which we're operating is. So we've had almost the perfect storm created over the last couple of years with COVID and with significant changes to the dental environment from an industry perspective, as well as a broader labor environment. So we've had situations where for the last 10 years, we've had a year-on-year decrease in the number of dental assistants that have graduated from dental assisting programs. Just between 2019 and 2020, we saw a 5% decrease in the number of hygienists that graduated from dental hygiene programs. We've seen the lowest level of unemployment for dental hygienists in the history of the ADA survey over the last couple of years. So at the same time, we've seen a significant increase in the number of doctors which have been graduated. And that's coupled with the fact that we've seen an increase in the number of dental schools which have come online. So we've seen this sort of shifting terrain, and those have had significant impacts on dental hiring. So Kerry, what are some factors that you've seen that have impacted dental hiring in your organization?
Well, aside from the obvious compensation, we'll take that one off the table. Everyone looks at that as sometimes the number one thing. Right now, we're seeing a lot of that post-pandemic work-life balance. It needs to be an excellent compensation, as well as what are you offering them as the added benefits? Can they take off the Wednesday or the Monday they want, traditionally where they could not before? Those are some of the things. It's the flexibility of their life outside of work. It's important to recognize that depending on what role it is, if it's a doctor versus a front office staff. But those extra added benefits matter besides just a sign-on bonus and besides just the compensation.
Oh, excellent. And it's funny you do mention that the work-life balance has become a significant issue. So we've certainly seen a change in the demographic, particularly in the doctor space, of the kinds of profiles of the doctors which have been graduating over the last sort of 5 years or so. We've certainly seen a switch to an increase in the number of female doctor graduates. Ron, have you seen any impact on sort of hiring with that switch in the demographic?
Well, I have had multiple clients reach out to me and tell me that they want a male doctor as opposed to a female candidate, just to kind of balance the genders in the practice. But I also, gender really doesn't play that much of a role. I feel like over the last few years, COVID has really impacted the candidates' desire to relocate in any way, shape, or form. So geography is playing a significant role in hiring right now. When I first started hiring doctors, I felt like there were always a group of maybe new grads coming out of school that were open to any location. They were focused on the opportunity. Nowadays, it's much more regional specific. Like they have to have some type of relationship with someone local, or they must have some type of family local, or it becomes much more of a challenge to get somebody to move if you're in a rural location. That's what I've seen the biggest impact over the last couple of years with COVID and quality of life. That's one of the aspects. Also, 4-day work weeks is a big thing for doctors nowadays.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that 4-day work week, rolls down into the support staff like the hygienists, the dental assistants, as well as the auxiliary staff. Is that something that you've noticed any challenges with the support and being able to hire doctors, Linda, in your organization?
Yeah, it has been challenging because like Ron said, people are reluctant to relocate now. And it's also been challenging because the doctors know that there's a shortage of dental assistants, hygienists, and they're asking those questions. Who's going to be supporting them in the office? So they're okay with 4 days a week. Where it becomes challenging is if you get a doctor that is trying to pay down their school loans and maybe they want to work 6 days a week, you have to be able to find the support staff to work with them in the offices. So we're always playing chess and moving people around. And, a lot of the female dentists, especially, it isn't that they don't want to work certain days. It's that people are still having challenges with childcare and who's going to watch the kids. And everybody's trying to balance that around their work life. And so I've found that really coaching the offices and the doctors in our offices that we're going to have to be flexible. We're going to have to get creative. And if we can find a schedule that works for our teams, and they can rotate in and out or whatever that looks like, it could be situational by office, we're going to have happy employees and they're going to stay and they're going to be loyal because we're actually helping them manage their life, their personal life and their professional life.
Absolutely. And it's, I think, very timely that you mentioned that, these doctors are graduating with huge debts and they want to start getting employed as quickly as possible. So I think that probably leads us to our next topic is, how do we actually build a talent acquisition system for speed? So we know that, broadly speaking, in our labor market, the average time to hire was about 41 days in the broad dental market and in the broad labor market. And in the sort of medical dental space, the average time to hire is about 49 days. So, the healthcare space is generally a little bit slower to hire, and that's understandable because of some regulatory requirements that have to be looked at, compliance matters. But we also know that the top 10% of candidates are usually taken within 10 days. So, how do we build that talent acquisition system so that we can get those top 10% of the candidates that we're looking for and that obviously everyone else is looking for? So, Ron, where would you recommend our audience goes to find doctors?
It's a great question, Hendrik. I think over my years of experience, the sourcing of doctors really hasn't changed significantly. I'm sure Linda would probably agree with this. So like the top 4 sources usually are internal referrals is always number 1. You can always get somebody who knows somebody, or if they're in a study club. Most of the larger organizations I work for, internal referrals is always the number 1 source for hires that they have. And they usually have some type of internal referral program where they pay $5,000 or $10,000 to the doctor or whoever refers the doctor that they hire. Number 2 would be Indeed / LinkedIn, those two probably. Indeed, what you really want to do is not only post a job on Indeed, but you want to source in the database as well and message candidates. Same thing with LinkedIn. You can post jobs on LinkedIn, but it's much more effective to send messages to potential candidates. And then number 3 would be dental school / residency programs. That type of recruitment, you really want to figure out who the ASDA reps are at the dental schools or the residency programs and really get in there, because then you can schedule dinners and Zoom conferences that way through the ASDA reps. And then I would say, number 4 would be conferences, state and local dental conferences, that kind of stuff. And then number 5 would say hiring somebody like me to help you out. So the top 5.
Absolutely. And Ron, now thank you for sharing that. And I noticed that you didn't sort of really push social media, as a platform by which, you're able to recruit a lot of doctors. Do you think that's true for other staff, hygienists and assistants?
Well, I think social media can be certainly effective. I'm pretty sure Linda can speak better to this than I can, but Like Facebook has, as the reps have a significant presence on Facebook, and I think a lot of assistants and office managers do as well. There's a lot of those groups on Facebook. So Facebook can be effective in that regard. From a doctor perspective, that's primarily where I come in. I don't really spend a lot of time on social media, minus LinkedIn maybe, for doctors. But for other positions, I think probably Linda is better to speak about that than I am.
Well, Linda, absolutely. You know, what's your experience been in utilizing sort of social media, and what kind of best practices do you see in helping to use social media to attract talent to organizations?
Well, like Ron, I've exhausted all of those other sourcing avenues that we use in recruiting. And years ago, I just became really frustrated by thinking through that maybe there were a lot of doctors that don't have a LinkedIn profile, or they're not on Glassdoor. They just don't go to those places to look for jobs. Maybe they have a headhunter or things like that. So I really utilize social media to put our brand out there so people see we're Elite Dental Partners, or, you know, you can do that with a single office or however you want to promote yourself, because professionals are on LinkedIn, especially doctors, and they may not be looking for a job when they see something that you posted, but they are seeing your brand and they're connecting with your brand. And when they are looking for a job, they're going to hit you up and say, hey, I always see you on LinkedIn. Do you have anything in North Carolina, or do you have anything in Illinois? And I've been able to increase my doctor candidate flow immensely by being really visible on social media. And by that, I don't mean posting my jobs, because nobody really engages with that content. We go in and we, write, we're hiring. Well, everybody is hiring. So what are we doing differently to attract candidates to our organization? And I say, highlight your teams, highlight your new hires. If you have a new doctor that's starting you want to connect, you want to say, hey, we have Dr. So-and-so starting with this. We are so happy he's here in our organization. And that I cannot believe the amount of candidates that I have reaching out to me now, because they know who we are. They see our culture. They see us having fun at CE courses. So aside from the job postings themselves, posting out your culture, your teams, what they're doing, maybe their birthdays, their milestones, their babies, celebrate those on LinkedIn, celebrate those on Facebook. And like Ron said, probably Facebook is the avenue for dental assistants and office managers, and Instagram and LinkedIn, they're more for the doctors and maybe your regional managers or support roles and things like that. But it's really the idea of people understanding who you are, what makes you unique, why should they choose your organization or your practice over all the hundreds of other recruiters that they're getting talked to by and they're getting reached out to. So I encourage everyone on this call to really embrace social media. And it's just another thing. It's a free tool for you to use to talk about how great your organization is or your practice is. And you really have to find that person, that kind of brand ambassador that likes to do it, because you can't just post something one week and then go dark for a couple months. Like, it needs to be a consistent message, and mix it up. Maybe throw a really great article about leadership in there, keep people's interest, keep it interesting, and you'll be surprised. 6 months from now, I would encourage everyone to send me an email and see if it didn't help, because I've done it in multiple organizations and it really does work. So I encourage you to try it.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Linda. And you mentioned, using social media to get your brand out there. We know that reputation of the brand is one of the top 2 reasons why a candidate will reject an offer from a organization. So do you have any best practices in respect to what people can do to enhance their brand reputation?
Yes, there's a couple things you can do. Obviously, because Indeed is so popular and that's kind of the go-to for candidates if they're looking to see, I'm going to I saw this post Linda did on Elite Dental Partners. I'm going to go check it out. I'm going to see what their company's about. And then I'm going to go look on Indeed and see what their ratings are, right? And that's where the wheels can come off for any organization, because we're not always looking at that. So you really have to pay attention to those reviews. And sometimes you can figure out who wrote them. Typically, the people who had a really bad experience or left on bad terms are the people that are going to write a poor review. So you want to address those as best you can and, talk it through, maybe try to see if they will remove that, resolve whatever the problem was. In addition to that, there are ways with Indeed that you can enhance your page to have a highlighted review that's a 5-star review before they see a poor review. So you can manage those reviews with Indeed or Glassdoor. They're the same company now. And just ask them, hey, can you help us fix this? They can't take the reviews down, obviously, unless they have violated some online rule. But what you can do in your organization is when you're out and about in your offices and you have a really happy employee, there's nothing wrong with asking them, hey, I noticed you really love your job. Would you mind writing a review on Indeed and just talk about your experience? So, you can casually ask your employees to do that, and that will help push some of those poor reviews down. And it is a constant battle. I've talked to a lot of other DSOs and my peers in the industry, and we're all struggling with the same thing. Everybody's hovering around 2.9, or sometimes it'll bump up to 3.0 on the ratings, and it's really tough to manage that reputation. But the more eyes you get on it and really trying to listen to your exit interviews and address the problems that are causing people to leave your organization and really try to fix them.
Oh, wow, Linda, thank you. That was incredible information that you've just shared with the audience. Really, really appreciate you. And as I mentioned, brand reputation is one of the top 2 reasons why candidates will reject an offer. The other reason is the candidate experience during the recruitment process. So we all know at the moment it's a candidate's market. Candidates are able to pick and choose the positions that they want. So what do we need to do in order to optimize the candidate experience so that candidates will choose your position over the dozens of other alternative positions that are there? So Kerry, do you have any sort of ideas that you'd like to share of how to create a selection process for candidates to positions to optimize their experience?
Well, sometimes this may seem a little funny, but I would reach out to Ron, as a professional recruiter, and Ron's smiling because that's exactly what I had to do in my role within Independence. I facilitate a lot of the recruitment process, which location, which doctor, which assistant. And because we're a geographically agnostic DSO and we're across coast to coast, I need to have someone with that ability to finesse that process, especially when it's a more challenging position or a challenging role to fill. Sometimes I go in, get the third-party vendors, such as Ron, to learn that process, to make it painless, to serve them up on a platter, so to say, to the office and say, here's your candidate. So a lot of that pre-vetting, knowing what you are looking for in a candidate. Some of the doctors are extremely rigid, or some of the offices can be very rigid on what they want. They either want a new grad or a veteran. And then sometimes it's just not out there. What they're wanting and what they're asking for is not out there. So we have to be able to align those looking, those in the job market, and those looking to employ someone. And we have to align those. And that makes the process somewhat challenging because the expectations need to be met on both sides. One, having that conversation with the candidate at first, letting them know what the process is, be clear and concise on what to expect, not to tell them they have one interview and then they turn around next week and now they've got 2 more lined up. It's that clear alignment. We're going to do 2 to 3 interviews. In that, we may end up having to do a personality test. With that, we also want you to come for a visit to the office. And so I think managing those expectations and not making it just check the box, but making it personable. A lot of candidates now, again, they're looking for the right cultural fit, and your interview process is very much reflective of the cultural fit for that center.
Absolutely, Kerry. That was amazing information there. We've actually had a question from one of our audience members. It's for the panel, but I guess, Ron, I think you might be a great person to answer this, but Jason says that, they have offices in smaller locales and I guess secondary cities. Do you have any specific suggestions around, the challenges of hiring to some of those smaller locales in secondary cities, particularly in, how do you create an appropriate selection process for candidates in those tough to fill markets?
Well, that's a two-pronged question, my friend, and we could take 2 hours to answer that thing, but I'll do my best to be short and concise. I actually just placed a doctor in Wasilla, Alaska, and your process should be the same regardless of where you're located, honestly, because if you follow certain steps in your recruiting process and you do it consistently, you should get results. And by that, I mean, you refresh all of your job postings at least once or twice a week. You search databases twice a day. So get into the Indeed database twice a day, the LinkedIn database twice a day. There's iHire Dental databases that's like $450 twice a day. You search the databases, send messages to candidates. You can also go on Dental Town. It's a free place to post jobs. Also, networking locally is very important. I've always thought that doctor recruitment is truly a grassroots effort. So the more people you know locally, the easier it is for you to find someone who will fit your culture. Now, creating up a selection process, it should look something like an initial phone screen, maybe a second phone screen, depending on who's doing the initial phone screen with a doctor, and then a site visit, and then an offer, really. Like, it shouldn't be much more than that. You need to make your process as easy for the candidate to go through as possible. You also need to create a kind of a sense of urgency within that process because for instance, I had a private practice client that I submitted a candidate to Monday of last week. The client didn't get back to me to schedule an interview for about a week, and that candidate was already off the market. So you really need to, once you get a candidate in, you have to contact that candidate within 24 hours and schedule that first call. And like Kerry said, the culture that you're representing will reflect itself in your selection process. And in my opinion, every dental practice, even at Elite Dental Partners, where that's kind of underneath the same umbrella, every practice will take on that personality of whoever the doctor or the leader is in that practice, right? Like, it could be a little different. You could have a really outgoing guy in one practice or a really, really kind of soft and shy, doctor in another practice. It really depends. The most important thing from a selection process, though, that I think you have to be honest and direct and sincere. I cannot stress this enough. I have seen so many DSOs promise the world to candidates, and once they get in, they realize that world is very different than what they were promised. Mm-hmm. And that leads, to turnover significantly. So just be honest. If you're sending them to a practice that could use a facelift, let them know that. Like, it's not that bad. I think you really want to recruit from retention, and that really starts from that first phone call. So, in a more rural market, there are a lot of pluses to recruiting in a rural market. First of all, patient flow is going to be there, right? Like, you're not have to do a lot of marketing. There's not a lot of competition. There's, I think there's room to grow in a rural market. There's a lot of pluses there. Access to care is a big deal. It's kind of how Aspen has grown to $1 billion business, is they're all about access to care in rural markets. Mm-hmm. So there are some benefits to a doctor to go into one. You just need to understand that and reflect that. And, have a sense of urgency. I think that sums it up. I'm good.
Well, thank you for that very, very candid response there, Ron. Ron, you did mention getting back to somebody within 24 hours. I mean, obviously, we're all looking for the ideal candidate. We're looking for the unicorn. But oftentimes, particularly in the secondary markets, it can be hard to find them. What happens if we leave a position go unfilled just because we can't find the perfect candidate? Kerry, what in your experience is the cost of leaving a vacant position open rather than in order to wait for the perfect candidate?
Oh, that's such a tricky question, and so much thought needs to be given into that with a lot of doctors. They will wait and wait and wait for a perfect candidate, and 6-7 months down the line, they've had no doctor in the chair, and performance matters. You can't perform if you don't have a provider there, right? So you need to have someone in that chair. Even if it's not that perfect candidate you're looking for, you've got to figure out what you're going to compromise on. I have a lot of doctors, again, say, I want a veteran doctor, but they want to pay him at the entry level price. So, you got to weigh that out. That's not always the best way to handle it by any means. And that's another topic of conversation. But when you're leaving a chair open, you could have hired that new graduate already. Maybe you were resistant on hiring, and you could have already trained them up within that 6-month period to where they could have been generating more revenue than a veteran doctor could have had. So that perfect candidate is one that's going to be able to fill that spot. That's the way I look at it. And a lot of doctors not been able or not willing to accept another partner or associate in that position just isn't acceptable. When you start looking at it, you look at your daily production, what you produce as a provider.
Mhm.
And you would take that daily production as a provider and you would just translate that into that second associate. That's your lost income by not hiring someone. That's your lost revenue by not hiring someone. So for that 6-month time period, 20 working days in a month, you have 120 days, say, of, $1,000 a day, super conservative number, by the way. It's 120,000 you've lost just sitting and waiting. And so we have to really consider the income lost by not willing to accept that non-perfect candidate.
Absolutely. I mean, we're not exactly talking pocket change now, are we, at $120,000 very
And
conservatively?
yeah, extremely conservative.
So, when we look at, the candidate experience, one of the key metrics that, a lot of recruitment companies look at is the candidate net promoter score. So it's, if a candidate was asked, would you, based on your experience with the recruitment process, would you want to work with this organization? So, the typical net promoter score we see with candidates that go through a recruitment company, is 27. So the net promoter score ranges from -100 to +100. So it's sort of barely positive. Now there's no best net promoter score. So there's no best net promoter score, but really all that your organization has to do is be better than the competition. So we know that, the average dental office has a net promoter score of 1. So in order for you to attract the best candidates and the best patients, or the kind of patients you want, you don't necessarily have to have a net promoter score of 100. You just need to have a net promoter score better than your competition, which on average is 1. So now with that being said, we know that the candidate experience is one of the top 2 reasons as to why a candidate will reject a relatively compelling offer otherwise. The job of recruitment is to get a candidate to say yes at some point. Kerry, do you have any creative ways or out of the box thinking that you've used to get a candidate to yes? Now, obviously, we have the classic things like sign-on bonuses, relocation bonuses, all those kind of things. But what out of the box ideas have you implemented in independence or throughout your career to get a candidate to yes?
Right now, sometimes that extra paid time off, giving them that flexibility, or a floating holiday. You have 2 floating holidays you can use any 2 days of the year. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but maybe they want to celebrate their birthday or non-traditional holiday that's not on the US average HR days off calendar. Also, sign-on bonuses, you see them everywhere now. How do you compete? Do you now do a $15,000 sign-on bonus versus the competition's 10? It's all relative when you look at it. So aside from that, maybe considering paying for part of their student loans. What percentage of their student loans are you willing to pay? If they make a base pay per day, are you willing to compensate them through helping them pay off their loans? The nice thing about that is not only do you get an employee, but you get the retention rate of that potential doctor because they're bought into the payment you're paying into their education. They value that. That's especially for the new grads. Some of those with, the time off, the days, extra compensation. I do at one time retention bonuses. It is important nowadays. You have people poaching people. There are markets now to where it's getting crazy, some of it. And we need to recognize the staff that we have there. And we need to recognize, aside from the doctors, that we couldn't do what we do without that staff. We couldn't do it without the assistants, the hygienists, the auxiliary staff. And those retention bonuses are a big deal. And it's who's to give them the retention bonus. To me, it's best suited that even though it may be approved from a higher level, that it needs to be the doctor in the center issuing that bonus, making note of it, because that's the leadership thing. And again, it's building on the culture. It's showing their appreciation. It's showing the value. And sometimes those smaller things, showing the culture, buying the birthday cake, getting the birthday balloon, Linda mentioned that, and the social media, it is important to people. We just don't need to show it and pretend. We need to walk the walk with that.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you mentioned, it matters who the bonus comes from. Ron, in your experience, does it matter who's on the interview team in terms of how successful the interview process or the candidate experience will be during the selection process?
Oh, without a doubt. I think, first of all, the doctor has to be involved in the selection process. Candidates, especially if you're recruiting a doctor, the doctor's going to open up to another doctor more willingly.
Yes.
But I also agree that like I have another private practice group of practices that has created a selection committee that includes a couple of hygienists, a couple of assistants, and a receptionist. And they do a panel interview with doctor candidates. And everybody is engaged in that interview. But that is beneficial on both sides, both for the candidate and for the employer, because everybody's getting to know everybody. And everybody can ask the right questions, and everybody's kind of bought in on bringing up this person on board. So, some of the smaller groups might be able to do something like that. The larger groups, you need to be quicker and more efficient. So including everybody at the practice isn't really realistic because it'll impede your ability to make money at the end of the day, right? But I also think that being available after hours and kind of in different times to interview candidates is also pretty important. These doctors aren't available 9 to 5 usually to do an interview.
Sure.
So, your recruiters need to be calling people after hours and on weekends. Those are the most effective times to get somebody on the phone and really engage them. Yeah, that's what I got.
And Ron, is there in your experience, an ideal number of interviews for a candidate to go through before an offer is made or before that candidate is sort of rejected as a candidate for the role?
I wouldn't say number of interviews. I would say number of hours spent with that candidate is probably more important. Going back to what Carrie was talking about, I think when you're trying to think outside the box to get someone to sign on, you really have to get to know them and what their hot buttons are, right? Like how many times I've gotten somebody's spouse on the phone and sold them on the opportunity? Like it's got nothing to do with the doctor, but I'm talking to the wife or the husband and getting them on board because I've realized that they're definitely making the decision in this thing. So you really have to get to know the candidate. And the only way you do that is by spending time with them and asking the right questions and listening. The recruiter's job is to listen to the candidate. That's it. Yes, you may ask some relevant questions, but at the end of the day, the more you listen, the more you let them talk about themselves, the more you learn, and the more beneficial it is to push those hot buttons that you learn about.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree with you more about engaging with the spouse. When I first had my first dental job, I was told that the only way to get a dentist to stay in a small town is to take him out and marry him off to a local. So I've been there and experienced it myself. Absolutely understand it. Let's say that we've had a successful recruitment process. We've found our ideal candidate, and we've made them the offer. They've said yes now. Now, what do we need to do as organizations to optimize their successful onboarding and their future job success? So, there are some very sobering statistics out there around, job success for new hires. So the overall job success rate for any new hire, and this is strangely pretty consistent, whether it's a frontline new hourly worker all the way up to a CEO. The overall failure rate for an 18-month for a new hire is about 46%. So for an hourly worker, it's about 50%. And we've got a fairly high failure rate, and the only unequivocally successful hires that we have, the total number of them is only 19%. So what do we need to do to make sure the candidates we hire are within that 19% range? So, let's sort of maybe step back and say, what does a successful onboarding process look like? Linda, in your experience, what does that look like for a new hire?
Well, for a doctor, it looks a little bit different than for the auxiliary roles, but that's for a lot of reasons. You want to make sure when the doctor starts that you've already had the conversations with them before their first day. What's their schedule going to be templated? How many patients are they going to be seeing that day? Where do they put their lab coat? What are the expectations? Like, those conversations all need to be had before they ever come into the practice. What does their first 30 days look like? Especially if it's a new grad that's going to need more mentorship maybe, and maybe the school they went to, they didn't have a lot of exposure to CEREC or things that the technology that maybe you have in your office. So really the doctor that's in the practice, or the regional manager, depending on how the organization is set up, really needs to stick close to that provider for the first 30 days, have a plan. Hey, you can expect to do 5 CEREC crowns before the end of the month. Really just working with them and supporting them, because that first 30 days is incredibly important, because they're still getting poached, and there's still people that are coming after them that want them in their organization. And if you're not giving them a good experience and you're not supporting them at the level they thought that they were going to have, there's a good chance that's not going to work out. So I think onboarding is incredibly important. It's incredibly important to get them connected to your organization. If you have CEs, get them signed up for them right away so they feel part of the organization and the company, and really hand-holding for as long as they need it. And it is important, because I have seen the fallout of that not happening. And when we course corrected and fixed that, now we have much higher retention rate, and those doctors staying on and signing for another year contract and things like that, because we did stick to our word and support them through. And even putting your best dental assistants with them, set them up for success.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. And Ron, I know that you've had a lot of experience through your career in sort of onboarding new hires into organizations at many levels through an organization. What would your onboarding process look like for a new hire?
Well, you have to create, in my mind, a schedule of kind of touch points. So, in a larger DSO organization, I actually created a calendar where at 30 days, our CEO would reach out and check in with the doctor and see how they were doing. And we had 180 doctor openings at any given annual time. And 30 days, at 60 days, at 30 days, 90 days, and like 180 days. So up to 6 months, you're still checking in with that new hire. And I literally would walk into the CEO's office and be like, you need to call Dr. Smith today, and I'm going to sit here and listen to you do it. And that would be really effective. The doctor would get a call from the CEO of the organization, and when you know that you're visible, you're loved, we want you here. But I also think on a micro level, like I have a couple of private practice clients that have 1 or 2 practices that have a very robust onboarding schedule that includes weekly one-on-ones with the new hire, monthly group meetings, and then quarterly doctor group meetings where everybody gets together, and that's scheduled throughout the year, and gives that new hire an avenue of communication. That's the other and most important thing. They have to know that if they're having a challenge in any way, shape, or form, there is an avenue for them to communicate that challenge to somebody who will fix it. That's it. They just need to feel the love, to be honest with you. We used to buy them flowers and cookies and whatever else. But they just need to know that they're valued, that you want them there, and that you're there to support their success. And of course, you're not going to be perfect. Like, not every job is for everybody, right? And you need to know and own that, but you need to just, move on. And if you make a mistake, admit it, and then, move forward and communicate with that doctor. You should be good. The people understand that.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned, a development plan, 30, 60, 90, 180 days. Do you feel that a cookie cutter plan, a cookie cutter onboarding plan works, or is it something that you feel needs to be more customized for the individual in order to optimize their success in their new jobs?
That's a good question. I think it's probably a little bit of both, but if you're looking to scale your organization, you need to create that solid foundation. Mm-hmm. And I think an onboarding schedule is an important aspect of that solid foundation. But you can definitely tailor it to each individual new hire. Like Linda and Carrie both said, you're bringing on a doctor is different than bringing on a receptionist. It's different. And you have to treat it in a different way. So as long as you do that, I think, but I still think creating those touch points and creating a calendar is probably the best approach that you can replicate if you want to grow your business.
Thank you for sharing that. And I guess, Kerry, in your experience, I know you've had some experience, creating customized plans for your new hires to make sure they are successful as they can be in their jobs. What does your typical customized plan look like, and what are the important factors that you'll think about in creating that plan for your new hires?
I think it's very important to be intentional in that. It needs to be semi-customized. And what I mean, echoing Ron, you have to have certain systems in place, especially with the DSO.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the basics, their payday, their payroll, logging in, getting used to those things, getting used to the DPMS. So part of that onboarding is getting them familiar with the software. That's extremely important, and making sure they have scheduled one-on-ones with the right people to help them with that. Part of the customized plan, though, is to help them avoid the sink or swim feeling. We've all had jobs to where you get thrown in and it's like sink or swim and you feel like you're sinking. And again, that's what creates that turnover, and that's not the culture that you want to drive in your practice. So it starts with that hiring interview in the process. In that you've got to find out why they're looking for your office, what intrigued them to come to your office, what was in the ad, whatever it may be. And sometimes it's a valid question to ask why they're parting ways with their previous location. Some people will give you, oh, I'm moving, or the commute's too far, but sometimes you got to ask those difficult questions once you've committed. And it's not to, talk ill of the last person, but to know what didn't make them happy. Some people do not communicate well, and so you have to pull it out of them. And then once you figure out their why, it could be a clinical why. They didn't feel confident in placing maybe implants, or they weren't getting the opportunity to place implants. So there could be a clinical why in that. And then some of them may want to take more of a leadership role, and they weren't offered that opportunity to be a leader in their practice. And so you have to customize a plan to help them become leaders. Some don't want to be a leader. They just want to clock in, do their dentistry, and walk out. So part of that customized plan is fitting it so that fits their needs, fits the business needs, fits the patient's needs and their needs, and to sit down and not only have that customized plan, but I'm a strong believer, you have to be honest with these people, straightforward from the get-go. There should not be a bait and switch situation on any of it. So, if they're going to go in and expect that you're going to provide implant training for them within the first year, then you need to explain what that looks like. Your commitment to them, their commitment to you. And in the meantime, you have to have that constant communication with them, constant. Ideally for me, if it's a doctor coming on board, I like to pair them up with another doctor,
Mm-hmm.
A couple of doctors, one a veteran doctor and one that's a newbie, a newbie that's maybe fresh in 3-6 months in. And so they get that sense of, okay, this is the new eyes on it. And then the veteran of, this is where I start and this is where I'll end up. And it's important to have that mentorship. Even though I have, hygiene experience and I've been clinical, doctors speak to doctor language, hygienists speak to hygienist language, assistants speak to assistant language. It's that lateral mentorship that matters. And it can't be from a place of management and a DSO always onboarding that doctor. I'm there to support them on the customized plan, but really I need that fellowship and the mentorship to make it successful.
Oh, absolutely. And I guess, you know, the ultimate goal of all of this is to sort of get the new hire to be comfortable, to feel like they belong, and then to get them, you know, for want of a better word, productive within the organization. You know, the average sort of spend on the hiring process, depending on, you know, the method by which a new hire comes on board, is somewhere between $4,000 and $40,000, depending on, you know, whether they're paying somebody like Ron to sort of bring them on board, plus the cost of background checks, plus the cost of maintaining a website, plus the cost of posting jobs. It can get pretty expensive. So obviously, you know, we all want to make sure we recoup our investment in the hire as quickly as possible. Do you have any best practices or any tips or tricks, Ron, with the fastest way to get a doc credentialed so they can actually get started within a practice?
It's a good question, Hendrik. I think depending on the size of your organization, you can do delegated credentialing. Delegated credentialing is the quickest way to get a doctor on board. But you have to have a certain amount of doctors on your team to be considered for delegated credentialing with the payer. So, you know, I can go through the explanation, but that's the quickest way to get them credentialed. The other way is to, you know, just have them see cash patients until they get credentialed. What you don't want to do, though, and I've seen a lot of the mid-level DSOs do that recently, is they'll hire a doctor and then make them wait 60 to 90 days to start until they get credentialed. And in that 60 to 90 days, I've talked to many candidates that have said, yeah, I signed a contract, but I'm looking for other jobs. I need to start working because I got to start paying my student loans. I got to get moving here. And they're on the bench. That's like the worst thing you could do. So you have to come up with a creative way to get them started. And even if it's just them seeing cash patients or out of network patients initially until you get them credentialed, that's what you're going to have to do. But again, delegated credentialing is just to define it for everybody that's not aware, is the payer, let's say Delta, delegates credentialing back to you so you can get them credentialed day one instead of waiting the 60, 90 days that it normally takes. And there really is no extra work on your end. At the end of the day, you're still collecting all of the same paperwork. It's just once a year that payer will audit like 5 files or 6 files to make sure you're doing the right stuff. And that's it.
Yeah, so just to sort of build on what Ron has said, the delegated credentialing process does require you to have a minimum number of providers before the payer will allow you to delegate the credentialing to yourself.
The number's usually 40.
So absolutely. And in terms of, you know, compliance and record keeping, it just means keeping a register. You're collecting the same information, you know, your NPIs, your license numbers, your DEAs, all that kind of thing. And, you know, once in a blue moon, usually once a year, the insurance payer will ask you to produce 5 of your providers' required information to them. But again, the benefit of that is that you're able to have somebody seeing in-network patients from day one, should you be eligible for delegated credentialing. So Kerry and Linda, within your organizations, have you implemented any sort of creative ways, or do you have any tips or tricks that you can share with our audience to allow doctors to get credentialed quickly so that they can begin to start seeing patients and feel like they belong within the organization? Linda, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, we kind of do the same as Ron. We get them started right away. We have a lot of fee for service and out of network, so we just get them going. We have an amazing credentialing team that starts collecting the documents and MPI information immediately so that we can move them quickly through the process. So having really good relationships with the insurance companies helps that process as well. They'll let you move people around and change locations. If you keep the lines of communication open with them, it can go a lot quicker that way. So it's really having all eyes on it and moving quickly through the process. But we never would hold a provider back on, because they weren't credentialed. We're going to get them in and see them patients one way or the other, because you're right, you will lose them quickly if that happens. So that's, I've been in several organizations, and for the life of me, there is just not an easier way for credentialing. It seems like the process has been kind of archaic for a long time. And it's always that 4 to 6 week time period before it all gets handled.
Well, thank you for that, Linda. And Kerry, do you have any sort of additional tips or tricks to get doctors credentialed?
I echo the same there. One of the other things we look at is some of our centers have patient membership plans, sometimes internal or through an external third-party vendor, and those are the fee-for-service patients. So we'll look at that list of the hygiene patients and go through those and know exactly who that provider will see. And in some cases, some of the dentists, instead of being benched, they're willing to do some of the hygiene appointments, the actual hygiene, like a hygienist, but that's only optional if a dentist is willing to do that for their revenue. I would never ask a dentist to just go and see hygiene patient after hygiene, but that has been a request because they don't want to sit idle either. They're ready to get to work. They want to use those skills. And then we increase marketing. If we know we're bringing on a provider, we'll bump up the marketing spend a little bit sooner for that cash pay patient to target that, or whitening, or whatever, anything that's not associated with dental insurance, and kind of ramp that up knowing they're coming on, and we'll put that and stack the schedule that way for them.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Well, I am very cognizant of the time, and we've had some great discussions with our panelists today about, some tips and tricks and best practices to work through the entire recruitment process. But I'd like to ask our panel one final thing today. If our audience was to take away one key message of the one thing that they should implement in their practices tomorrow that will make a difference, what would that be? Linda, would you mind sharing your one thing with our audience?
Well, I think I'm just going to share what I'm most passionate about recruiting, and that is flipping the switch from recruiting to retention. And I just encourage everyone to go back and think through their employees and who is on their team and who maybe has been overlooked or maybe hasn't been valued as much as they could be, and really try to retain the wonderful people that you have in your offices already. And I get it. Obviously, there are times when there are just people that aren't a fit and you move them around and it's just not working out. And sometimes you have to make those tough decisions. But really focusing on all the good people that you have is going to eliminate a lot of this looking for the purple squirrel unicorn, because you might already have it there in your practice, and value them and pay them what they're worth and then some, and make sure they have room for growth and development. And a lot of candidates cite when they're leaving jobs that it's because there was nowhere for them to go to be promoted or to do other things that maybe they were interested in. So you have amazing practices with amazing people already in them. Figure out how to keep them happy and engaged, and then we won't have so many problems recruiting because the people that you already have will be staying with you, and anyone you're bringing on is because you're expanding and growing. So that's my best tip and advice for the day.
Thank you, Linda. And Ron, do you have your one thing you'd like our audience to take away?
Of course, I got two things. One, sense of urgency, and two, do not make promises you can't keep during the selection process to anybody. Like, that's the most important thing. And I wish you the best. And if you can't find somebody, hire me.
I will back that up.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that, Ron. And Kerry, what would your one thing be that you would like our audience members to take away?
Well, Ron kind of stole mine about don't promise something you can't deliver. But I'd have to say, constantly voice gratitude towards your staff. Stay persistent with it. Make a note. I don't care if it's a Post-it note to yourself. Every day, voice gratitude for your staff. Because when you're asking for those internal referrals, you better be thankful for the internal referrals. And it's not a one-time saying thank you. You have to do it constantly. You have to do it constantly. When you do people will bring their friends. They'll bring people they like to you instead of people they don't like to you. So keep voicing the gratitude. You'll get more that way.
Absolutely. I absolutely appreciate you. And thank you very much to our panel. We would love to invite our audience to join us for our next DSO micro MBA session, which is Payer Relations, Partnering with Payers for Mutual Success. And that will occur in 2 weeks' time, same day, same time. Appreciate you all. And I hope you've taken something away from our panel today. Thank you.
Thank you.